What opportunities does microbial biodiversity offer to tackle climate change and craft wines with increasingly distinctive profiles? Welcome to episode 4 of season 2 of Winemaking Experiences by Enartis, the podcast dedicated to the world of winemaking. We're joined by Paolo Antoniali, CEO of Italiana Biotecnologie, to explore the potential of Non-Saccharomyces yeast. From biocontrol strategies to reduce the use of sulfites to sequential fermentations that lower alcohol content and enhance aromatic complexity. Join us to discover why these yeasts represent the future of winemaking and how they can turn winery challenges into opportunities by providing sustainable and high-value solutions.
Please be aware that the following audio has been translated from Italian to English using AI.
Hello to all wine enthusiasts and winemaking professionals, and welcome to our podcast, Winemaking Experiences by Enartis. I'm Lorenza Secchi, Head of Marketing at Enartis, and today I have the pleasure of being joined by Paolo Antoniali, CEO of Italiana Biotecnologie. Welcome, Paolo.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone.
Italiana Biotecnologie is a company dedicated to applied biotechnology research with deep expertise in yeast and bacteria used in winemaking. Paolo, let me start by saying how happy I am that you're with us today. We'll be diving into several topics related to yeast. Spoiler alert, we'll be talking about a non-Saccharomyces yeast too. But before we get into that, I'd love for our listeners to hear a bit about your background. Paolo has over 30 years of experience working with yeast, so he's truly a specialist in this field. Paolo, how did you end up working with enological yeast for over 30 years, especially in such a specialized area? Tell us a bit about your story.
Well, it all started more than 30 years ago, back in 1989. I had just completed my military service and graduated from an agricultural technical institute when I landed a job at a yeast factory. It was part of a Dutch multinational with a facility in northern Italy in the province of Pavia. I started there with the basics, cleaning tanks, fermenters and floors. And I thought to myself, maybe it's time to study again, so I enrolled in the biology program at the University of Pavia.
Thank you, Paolo. It's inspiring to hear how you started from the ground up, cleaning those tanks, and evolved into someone deeply involved in both the practical and research aspects of microbiology. Let's shift our focus back to the world of wine and enology. Today, our industry is facing significant changes, particularly due to climate change. These shifts are creating imbalances that begin in the vineyard and carry through to fermentation and the entire winemaking process. From a microbiological perspective, how do you interpret these imbalances, and do you believe that biodiversity can play a positive role in fermenting these wines?
Well, biodiversity certainly needs to be managed and understood, not only protected. When I first started working in a yeast factory producing enological strains, the options were quite limited. We were working exclusively with Saccharomyces cerevisiae, and there were probably fewer than 10 strains in use. Today, companies now offer a wide array of S. cerevisiae strains, which shows just how much value is placed on biodiversity by those who select, produce, and market these yeasts. Within S. cerevisiae alone, there's a remarkable degree of genetic variability. This means that different strains bring different strengths to the table. Some are more tolerant to high temperatures, others have enzymatic activity that helps release aromatic compounds from grapes, and some are more resistant to stressors like inhibitors or heavy metals. So yes, biodiversity is critical and it must be studied and understood. Also, when I started, non-Saccharomyces yeast were considered technologically unsuitable for winemaking. They were either incapable of completing fermentation or were known to produce off aromas, so they were not even considered.
Yes, they were almost demonized. There was a real fear surrounding them.
That fear was actually rooted in scientific understanding at the time. Some non-Saccharomyces species, such as Hanseníaspora apiculata, are known to produce high levels of acetic acid or ethyl acetate, which can lead to undesirable aromas in wine. So that wariness was justified for wines intended for commercial sale, but things began to change as technical and scientific approaches evolved. We learned that just like Saccharomyces cerevisiae includes a wide range of strains with different physiological traits, the same is true for non-Saccharomyces species. Researchers began exploring the biodiversity within these yeasts and discovered that some of them possess technological traits that are particularly valuable, especially in the context of climate change over the past 20 to 30 years.
Absolutely. So which non-Saccharomyces species are most commonly studied today, and how can they contribute positively to winemaking? And as you mentioned, each species or even each strain has its own traits. In non-Saccharomyces, what are those traits depending on species or strain?
First, we need to distinguish these yeasts based on their fermentative capacity. Some non-Saccharomyces species have little to no ability to ferment, while others do. For alcohol fermenters, Torula spora delbrueckii is a classic example. It can produce a significant amount of alcohol. Similarly, Cloiveromyces thermotolerans, now Lachantia thermotolerans, can ferment alcohol. Others, such as Mechnikovia pulcherrima or Pichia cluiveri, are poor or non-fermenters. Then there are borderline genera like Candida stellata and Hansennia spora, which can ferment to a moderate extent, but often produce high levels of acetic acid or ethyl acetate. Brettanomyces is another example. It can ferment and is alcohol tolerant, but it's also known for its spoilage potential. So, depending on their fermentative behavior and metabolic traits, these yeasts can be applied in different ways in winemaking.
These applications are mainly linked to impacts on the wine's organoleptic profile. These non-Saccharomyces produce aromas, right?
Yes, but there's more. Applications include biocontrol, using beneficial microorganisms to inhibit the growth of undesirable ones. For example, M. pulcherrima can inhibit spoilage yeast like Hansennia spora. This is partly due to its ability to thrive at low temperatures. It can even multiply at 5 to 10 degrees Celsius. It also produces pulcherriminic acid, which binds to iron in the environment to form pulcherrimin. This compound makes iron unavailable to other microbes, limiting their growth. Additionally, it's cryotolerant and microaerophilic. At low temperatures, must contains more dissolved oxygen, and this yeast uses that oxygen to metabolize sugars respiratively rather than fermentatively. As a result, it consumes some sugars early on that won't be available for fermentation later, leading to a slightly lower final alcohol content in the wine.
Slightly lower.
Take Pichia cluiveri, another low fermenter and part of the so-called Crabtree negative yeasts. Unlike Saccharomyces cerevisiae, it doesn't experience sugar repression in the presence of oxygen. It has strong enzymatic activity on aromatic precursors in grapes, releasing terpenes and thiols. L. thermotolerans, formerly Cloiveromyces thermotolerans, is unique in that it produces significant amounts of lactic acid, typically around 7 to 8 grams per liter, and in some strains even up to 15 grams per liter. This acidification lowers the pH of the must, which can inhibit the growth of spoilage microbes that are sensitive to low pH. T. delbrueckii also helps liberate aromatic precursors during maceration. Applications range from pre-fermentation to fermentation phases. Sequential fermentations with Saccharomyces yield both aromatic complexity and reliable sugar completion.
That's a really important point and not always an obvious one. You mentioned that some non-Saccharomyces only ferment to a certain alcohol level, while others contribute enzymes or other benefits. Then what is sequential inoculation? Sometimes it's seen as a limitation that non-Saccharomyces can't complete fermentation alone. But you said it can be an advantage to have two microorganisms together. Explain the value of sequential inoculation.
Sequential fermentation becomes almost essential when you're working with a microorganism that can't complete fermentation on its own. We know that S. cerevisiae is the most reliable yeast for fully fermenting sugars. Its role is indispensable even in spontaneous fermentations. In spontaneous fermentations, multiple microorganisms act in succession until S. cerevisiae, tolerant to ethanol above 12 to 15%, finishes the job. So spontaneous fermentations are naturally sequential. In controlled fermentations using selected starter cultures, introducing Saccharomyces cerevisiae ensures that sugar consumption is completed efficiently and predictably.
Earlier, you mentioned the biocontrol action of Mechnikovia pulcherrima in must pre-fermentation. Today, one of the major challenges in winemaking is the reduced antimicrobial effectiveness of SO2 at higher pH levels. Could non-Saccharomyces like M. pulcherrima serve as an alternative to SO2?
Absolutely. We've been running trials using natural white musts at low temperatures, around 5 to 10 degrees Celsius, and inoculating them with non-Saccharomyces yeasts, particularly Mechnikovia pulcherrima. Torula spora del Bruechi, and Pichia cluiveri for about a week. These yeasts consume very little sugar, produce negligible ethanol, and effectively inhibit spoilage yeasts like Hansennia spora. We've also measured pH reduction up to 0.25 units from 3.5 to 3.25 and increased organic acids, succinic malic. With L thermotolerance, pH drops even more due to lactic acid production. However, too much lactic can be undesirable, so the goal is to find a balance, ideally increasing succinic and malic acids moderately. We're finding the right conditions, temperature, oxygen dosing, strain selection to ensure all yeasts coexist harmoniously. The result is a must with lower pH, higher acidity, and slightly reduced alcohol. After this phase, sequential inoculation with Saccharomyces cerevisiae becomes almost essential to complete fermentation.
Certainly, so sequential inoculation is key. Looking toward the future, the non-Saccharomyces yeasts offer a major avenue for exploration. While still in R&D, we already know quite a bit. One more question. I could chat with you all day about this topic. It's fascinating. I'm curious. Beyond wine, and apart from beer, where non-Saccharomyces are already used, do you think they could be applied in other alcoholic beverages like spirits and others?
Yes, there are already experiments. For example, L. thermotolerans, Cloiveromyces thermotolerans, is being used in fermentations for distillation substrates from tequila to whiskey. Candida zemplinina has been used in tequila production rich in fructose because it's highly fructophilic. We're interested in using non-Saccharomyces in distillates and fermented distilled beverages. As I mentioned at the beginning, biodiversity is a heritage to preserve, study, defend. Just as we've done with Saccharomyces, we need to continue researching and isolating new non-Saccharomyces strains from vineyards and natural environments. That's the model for the future.
Thank you, Paolo, for being with us today and guiding us through the fascinating world of non-Saccharomyces yeasts. This was the final episode of our season. We began by discussing sustainability in our cellars, then explored innovations in digitalization and sensor technology, and today we've wrapped up with cutting-edge developments in biotechnology. Thank you to everyone for listening.